In the winter of 1969, in a small country most of the world had forgotten, a pop song was playing in a national stadium. It was Those Were the Days, a song about taverns, friends, and nostalgia. But as the upbeat melody echoed off the concrete walls, 150 men were lined up on the grass. And the men holding the rifles, they were dressed as Santa Claus. This wasn't a movie, this wasn't a nightmare, it was government policy. By the time the song ended, the intellectual heart of the nation was gone. We often ask how a country collapses. We look for wars, for famines, for invasions. But in Equatorial Guinea, the collapse didn't come from the outside. It came from a clerk, a man who failed his civil service exams 3 times and decided that if he couldn't be smart, no one could be allowed to think. His name was Francisco Macías Nguema. A place where reading a book was a death sentence and the national treasury was kept in a suitcase under a bed, until it rotted. This is what happens when power replaces reality. This is the story you are never supposed to know.
This was his defense at his trial. Just listen to that for a moment. It's not a plea of innocence. It's a statement about the nature of reality itself. He's saying that once you have absolute power, things like right and wrong, they just cease to exist. In his mind, he hadn't broken the law. He was the law. But a delusion this complete, it doesn't just spring up out of nowhere. No, it's a slow-growing cancer fed by years of insecurity and private humiliation. It starts not with a monster, but with a deeply, deeply broken man. And that's where we have to begin. To really understand the architect of all this silence, you have to understand the petty clerk. His entire worldview, his every action, wasn't driven by some grand political theory. It was all shaped by a burning, secret sense of failure. A grudge that he held onto for decades, just waiting for the chance to get back at a world he felt had laughed at him. Now, to really feel the scale of the horror, you have to see what was lost. Before Macías in the 1960s, Equatorial Guinea was, well, it was doing okay. It was a rich Spanish colony, a major cocoa exporter. Believe it or not, it had the highest literacy rate in the region. There were working hospitals, railways, a growing middle class of educated people. It was a country with a real future. But underneath it all, the Spanish colonial system had taught the people a very dangerous lesson for generations. You do not question authority, you obey. That system of obedience was the perfect, fertile soil for a man like Macías to plant his seeds of terror. You know, we love stories about people who overcome obstacles with skill and hard work. Macías, he's the dark reflection of that story. His path to power wasn't paved with achievements. It was paved with grievances. He saw every personal failure not as his own fault, but as a conspiracy. Every person who was smarter, more successful, or more respected than him became an enemy. Not just a personal enemy, but an enemy of the entire nation he was about to build in his own image. And it all boils down to this one single number: 3. 3 times he tried to pass the basic civil service exam to become a colonial administrator, and 3 times he failed. Now, for most people, that's a disappointment. For Macías, it was a wound that never healed. It was proof of what he'd always suspected, that the educated elites, the ones who passed the test, were all laughing at him. This one small number, this is the origin story of his war on the mind. It was a quiet vow that one day he would destroy the very idea of intelligence. So, when independence was on the horizon, the Spanish looked around for a local leader they could control, a puppet. They saw Macías, this quiet, resentful man, and they thought, perfect. They mistook his massive insecurity for weakness. They thought they could manipulate him. What they failed to see was that his insecurity wasn't weakness at all. It was the fuel for a terrifying engine of revenge. They didn't just pick a leader. They handed a lit match to a pyromaniac standing in a library. So that leads us to a really chilling question. How long does it actually take to dismantle a country? How quickly can you turn hope into absolute terror? In Equatorial Guinea, the answer wasn't years or even months. It was a matter of days. 79 days. That's it. For just over 2 months, the country got to pretend it was a new, free democracy. Macías was elected president, and then he just made up a story about a coup attempt against him. It was a lie, but it was all he needed. He declared a state of emergency that would never end, banned every other political party, and made himself the one and only source of power. The dream of democracy was over before it even really began. And what was his very first act with this new absolute power? He ordered all 7,000 Spanish residents to get out immediately. Now, you have to understand, these weren't just the old colonial masters. These were the country's doctors, the engineers who kept the lights on, the pilots,
the most experienced teachers. To any sane leader, this would be suicide. But for Macías, it was a profound relief. He was getting rid of anyone who knew more than he did. He was erasing anyone who could call him out on a lie. And again, we have to ask the question, why did the world just let this happen? As an entire nation's brain was being surgically removed, where was the outrage? Well, Spain had its own problems back home. For the US and the Soviet Union, this tiny country had no value in the Cold War. And so, the world looked away. This is always the first step into the abyss, isn't it? The quiet removal of expertise met with a shrug of indifference from the outside world. What came next wasn't just a dictator tightening his grip. It was something much stranger, much more terrifying. It was a systematic war against the very concept of thinking, a mission to create a nation so quiet you could hear a pin drop, because the only mind allowed to work was his. His tactics were pure psychological terrorism. On Christmas Eve of all days, he had 150 of his political opponents rounded up in the National Stadium. Then, over the loudspeakers, he blasted the cheerful, nostalgic pop song, "Those Were the Days." As the music played, a firing squad walked onto the field. They were dressed as Santa Claus. And they executed all 150 men. The point wasn't just to kill his enemies. It was to destroy meaning itself. To take a holy day, a beloved children's character, a happy song, and weld them permanently to an act of mass murder. The message was clear. Nothing is sacred. Logic is gone. After that, the war on the mind became official policy. It was methodical. First, all the schools were shut down. Then, private education was outlawed. He sent his thugs to burn libraries. He even banned the word intellectual. And then, in the most direct act of revenge for his own failures, he made it a crime to wear eyeglasses. He decided they were a sign of intellectualism, and the punishment for wearing them was death. The very tool used to see the world clearly became a death sentence. So what do you think happens to a country's economy when thinking itself becomes illegal? It doesn't just crash, it disintegrates, it rots from the core, just like the mind of the man in charge. The numbers, they're just staggering. Look at this. In 1968, before Macías, Equatorial Guinea's GDP per capita was higher than some parts of Southern Europe. It was a wealthy place, thanks to cocoa. Just 8 years later, it was near zero. The currency was meaningless, the farms were abandoned, people were trading yams for fish just to survive. This chart doesn't show an economic downturn, it shows a nation being unplugged from the world. Macías, of course, didn't trust banks, or accountants, or anyone who understood finance. So he did what any paranoid person would do. He ordered the national bank to be emptied. He took the entire physical cash treasury of the nation, and he stuffed it into suitcases and wooden boxes, which he kept in a little bamboo hut in his village. He literally slept on top of his country's entire fortune. He thought if he could touch it, he could control it. But there was one enemy he hadn't planned for: the jungle humidity. Slowly, quietly, the damp air and the termites did their work. All those millions of dollars, the entire wealth of a nation, just rotted. It turned into a useless, gray, pulpy sludge. And with the money physically gone, everything stopped. The power stations went dark, the water pumps fell silent. The silence he had craved was now absolute. So, with his country destroyed and every voice of dissent silenced, Macías finally retreated from the world entirely. The last stage of his rule wasn't about politics anymore. It was pure hallucination. He had finally achieved total control over everyone around him, only to completely lose control of what was inside his own head. He locked himself away in his palace and started consuming huge amounts of iboga, a powerful hallucinogenic root. And every single night, he began a terrifying ritual. He would command his staff to cook a massive feast and set a long, formal dinner table with place settings for all the government ministers he had ordered killed years before. And then he would sit at the head of the empty table, all alone in the humid jungle night, screaming at the ghosts of the men he had murdered. His mind was now filling the silence he had created with his own victims. In the end, it wasn't the people who rose up. They were too broken, too scared. The end came from inside his own circle. His paranoia finally became so extreme that he turned on his own family. And his nephew realized that for a man who argues with ghosts, no living person can ever be trusted. A coup was the only way to survive. 80,000. That is the final number.
80,000 people murdered or just vanished in a country that only had 300,000 people to begin with. That's almost a third of the population gone. The scale of the loss is just hard to comprehend.
The psychological grip he had on the country was so total that even after he was captured, his own soldiers were terrified of him. During his trial, they kept him in a huge iron cage because they refused to get close to him. They truly believed he had black magic. And when he was finally sentenced to death, not one soldier from his own country would join the firing squad. They were all convinced his ghost would come back and haunt them. They had to fly in mercenaries from Morocco just to carry out the execution.
And this brings us to the final and maybe the most disturbing question of all. How did this happen? Macías was one man. He didn't pull every trigger. How did his neighbors, his countrymen, become his executioners? The answer lies in a very dark corner of human psychology, our deep-seated tendency toward obedience to authority. It's the instinct to simply follow orders from someone in power, even if those orders make you sick to your stomach. You see it perfectly in the famous Milgram experiment. Scientists brought in regular people, just like you and me, and had them deliver what they thought were painful, even lethal electric shocks to another person, all because a guy in a lab coat told them to. A staggering 65% of people, 2 out of 3, were willing to go all the way to the maximum voltage. The horror of Equatorial Guinea isn't just about one monster. It's about a terrifyingly common human flaw that lives inside all of us. The story of Francisco Macías Nguema is an extreme case, of course, but the pattern is a warning. It always starts quietly. It starts when we decide expertise doesn't matter, when loyalty becomes more important than truth, and when we allow fear to make us silent. The real question this story leaves us with isn't just how this happened over there so long ago, but what we need to watch for right here, right now, to make sure it never happens again. So I ask you, what part of this story shocked you the most?